Hello everyone, viewers. We think we know the stories of the prophets. Men of sand and faith, hearing whispers in the wind, seeing signs in the flock. But what if one of them saw something that wasn't a whisper? What if he saw a machine? What if he documented, with the terrifying precision of a traumatized eyewitness, an event so strange, so technologically advanced, that we're still trying to decipher his words This is the story of Ezekiel, a priest in exile, who looked up from the muddy waters of a foreign river and saw the sky tear open. What he saw has been called the throne of God. But look closer at his words, and you might start to wonder if he was the first man in history to have a close encounter of the third kind. Forget everything you thought you knew about angels and visions. Today we're not walking through a dusty scroll. We're looking at a technical The world, for a man named Ezekiel, son of Buzi, had already ended. He was a priest without a temple, a holy man in an unholy land. Jerusalem, the city of God, the beating heart of his faith, was a smoldering ruin, its walls breached, its sacred treasures plundered, its people dragged in chains across the desert to the heart of the Babylonian Empire. His home was now a refugee camp called Tel Aviv, a settlement of broken people by the banks of the Chebar River, a large irrigation canal that snaked through the Mesopotamian plain. The air here was thick with the smell of foreign gods and the dust of foreign fields. Hope was a currency scarcer than water. The people whispered, "God has abandoned us. He is trapped in the ruins of his temple." Ezekiel, a man in his 30th year, the very year he should have begun his full priestly service in a glorious temple, instead sat by the filthy water, the symbol of his people's captivity, and stared into the void. His past was ashes, his future a blank wall. It was the 5th day of the 4th month. The summer heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the soul. The sky was a vast, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in the teeth, in the bones. A pressure change in the air like the moment before a lightning strike, but 100 times more intense. Ezekiel looked north, the direction of his lost home, but also the direction of his conquerors. From that horizon, a storm was brewing. But this was no ordinary storm. It wasn't the swirling chaos of sand and wind he knew. This was a storm It wasn't just dark. It was self-illuminated, shot through with an inner fire, a churning vortex of incandescent light that folded in on itself. He described it as enfolding fire, a paradoxical image of contained, controlled chaos, a nuclear furnace wrapped in a shroud of vapor, and around this boiling heart of light, a brilliance, a noga, a radiant halo of such intensity. This object, this storm, that was not. A storm blotted out the real sun. It cast a shadow of dread over the land. The exiles around him, those toiling in the fields or mending their shacks, would have stopped, their mouths agape. What god of Babylon was this? What monstrous omen had come to seal their doom? But Ezekiel, the priest, knew the signs of his god, thunder. It was structured. This was not the wild glory of nature. This was the calculated precision of a machine. As the storm cloud drew nearer, the low hum escalated into a roar, a sound not of wind, but of immense powerful mechanics. And from the center of the fire, from the very heart of the inferno, something began to resolve. A shape, or rather 4 shapes. He saw what he called the likeness of his priestly mind, trained in the meticulous details of sacrifice and ritual purity, was now confronted with a reality that had no category. These beings had the general shape of men, a bipedal, upright form that was both familiar and grotesquely wrong. But that was where the familiarity ended. Each one had 4 faces, 4 distinct visages, each pointing in a cardinal direction, a terrifying 3. On the right, the face of a lion, the embodiment of predatory power and royalty. On the left, the face of an ox, a symbol of strength, of sacrifice, of tireless labor. And on the back, the face of an eagle, with its piercing gaze, a master of the sky. A man, a king of beasts, a beast of the field, a lord of the air, all the domains of creation, fused a living blasphemy, or a creature of such holiness, it shattered all definitions of life. Their bodies weren't flesh and blood. Ezekiel describes their legs as straight, rigid supports. not bent at the knee like a human, but moving with a stiff, mechanical grace. And their feet, he said, were like the feet of a calf. But they weren't made of hoof and horn. They gleamed, they shone, with the They were striding on metallic hooves that shimmered in the fiery light. This wasn't biology. This was engineering, and the wings, each creature had 4. 2 were spread out above, touching the wings of the creature next to it, forming a perfect solid square, a unified canopy of feathers, or something that looked like feathers. His language struggles here. The other 2 wings on each creature covered their bodies, a gesture of modesty or perhaps a way of shielding their core mechanics. When they moved, the sound of these wings was cataclysmic. Ezekiel strained for metaphors. It was like the sound of many waters, the roar of a waterfall amplified 1,000 times. It was like the voice of Shaddai, the Almighty, a sound that could create and uncreate worlds. It was a symphony of overwhelming power. These 4 beings were connected, moving as one. They didn't need to turn their bodies. Whichever way the spirit, the impulse, the command wanted to go, they went. Their 4 faces already looked in every direction. They moved forward, backward, left, right, with an instantaneous, disorienting quickness. No hesitation, no preparation, pure, moving bright coals like torches darted back and forth among the creatures. And out of the fire lightning flashed. Not random bolts, but focused, directed energy. The entire assembly was a self-contained power plant, a living engine of fire and lightning. Ezekiel fell to his knees, his mind reeling. Was he seeing angels? The seraphim, the cherubim, the Bible described them, but not like this. Something new, or something so ancient. Its description had been lost to time, deemed too terrifying or too unbelievable to be recorded. As he stared, trying to process the impossible biology of the creatures, his eyes were drawn downward to the ground beside them. And what he saw there was, in some ways, even more bizarre, even more alien. He saw wheels, 1 wheel on the ground beside each of the 4 creatures, but he described them as having the appearance of beryl, a word for a gleaming, translucent sea green or sky, blue stone. They were like solid crystal, yet they moved. They were immense, tall, and terrifying. And their design was a paradox, a geometric impossibility. He saw a wheel within a wheel. For centuries, scholars have debated this. Is it a gyroscope? It's the only way to make sense of his next description. When they moved, they went in any of the 4 directions without turning. Think about that. A car has to turn. A chariot has to turn. Any wheeled vehicle we knew until the 20th century had a turning radius. These wheels did not. Like the creatures they served, they could move forward, then instantly move left, then instantly move backward, without any The creatures and the wheels were a single integrated system. Wherever the spirit wanted to go, they went, he wrote. And the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. The life force, the animating principle, the operating system, was shared between the biological-looking entities and the mechanical-looking wheels. They were one being, a biomechanical entity. And then came the detail that pushes this encounter from the merely strange into the realm of cosmic horror. The rims of the wheels, their entire circumference, were full of eyes. Hundreds of them not painted on, but part of their very structure. These weren't just wheels. They were sensory organs. They were alive, aware, and all-seeing, the entire craft. This chariot was watching him. The sheer intelligence, the overwhelming alien consciousness of the machine, was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. Ezekiel, the priest, would have searched his mind for an explanation. The cherubim in Solomon's temple were guardians of the holy. They were depicted as winged beings, but they were static, golden statues. This was a living, moving, seeing throne, a vehicle for the divine, to see the raw, terrifying, mechanical reality of it. It was like someone who has only ever read about the sun suddenly being thrown into its core. The sheer scale was overwhelming. When the creatures moved, the wheels moved. When the creatures stopped, the wheels stopped. When the creatures lifted from the earth, the wheels lifted with them. This was not a chariot being pulled. It was a craft with an integrated propulsion system. It could hop. He understood the world in terms of divine order and natural law. But what he was seeing broke every law he knew, creatures that were also machines, wheels that were also alive. A storm that was also a vehicle. He was witnessing a technology so far beyond his own, he could only describe it using the vocabulary he had: fire, clouds, bronze, wings, eyes. Let's pause for a moment and put ourselves in his place. Now, imagine you see a modern stealth bomber, a massive, dark, geometric shape that moves with impossible speed and silence. How would you describe it? You might talk of a great, dark bird with unmoving wings. You might speak of its roar as the voice of a god. You might describe its gleaming metal skin as polished stone. You are limited by your language, by your concepts. Now imagine a craft that hovers silently, that moves in any direction without turning, that seems to be both alive and mechanical, crewed by beings that are a fusion of different life forms. How would you even begin to describe that? You would reach for the most powerful, the most sacred, the most terrifying images you know. You would call it the chariot of the gods, because what other explanation could there be? As Ezekiel stared, transfixed by the impossible geometry of the wheels and the terrible faces of the creatures, he heard the sound of the wings again, the four beings lifted higher off the ground, the roar intensified, shaking the very earth beneath his feet. And as they rose, he saw something above their heads, something that made his blood run cold. He called it a rakia, a firmament or an expanse. He said it sparkled, like the color of an awesome crystal. It was transparent, shimmering, and terrible in its perfect, unnatural clarity. It was a canopy, a floor, a divider between the engine below and whatever was above. Imagine a vast crystalline plate, suspended in midair, held aloft by these four impossible beings. Beneath this crystal platform, the structure was stable, a perfect flying platform. Then, a sudden change, the creatures stopped their flight. They stood still in the air, and they lowered their wings. And in the sudden, deafening silence that followed the cataclysmic roar, a new sound emerged. A voice. It came from above the crystal platform. Ezekiel's eyes, full of terror and wonder, lifted. He looked through the transparent crystalline surface. This was a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive sapphire, a deep celestial blue glowing with its own inner light. It was a seat of impossible beauty and cosmic authority. And on the throne there was a figure. Ezekiel's description here becomes hesitant, shrouded in layers of metaphor. He cannot look at it directly. The radiance is too much. He says it had the likeness of the appearance of a man. From the waist up, he saw what looked like glowing metal, like electrum or chashmal, a substance so bright it was like fire enclosed in a transparent shell, a core of pure, white-hot energy contained within a humanoid field. From the waist down, he saw the appearance of fire. The figure's legs were columns of living flame, and all around this being of fire and light was a brilliant aura, a radiant glow. This radiance, he said, was like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. The sign of God's covenant with Noah, the promise of mercy after destruction, amidst the terrifying machinery, the monstrous faces, the impossible physics. Here was a symbol he could understand, a sign of hope. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. The paradox was complete, but this God was not an old man in the clouds. He was a being of pure energy, piloting a terrifyingly advanced celestial vehicle, crewed by biomechanical entities. The priest's mind finally broke. The sheer sensory and theological overload was too much. He did what any human would do when confronted with such an overwhelming, incomprehensible reality. He fell on his face, prostrate on the ground. The vision had served its purpose. It was a message, not just for Ezekiel, but for his entire people. The message was this: God was not trapped in Jerusalem. God was not dead. God was not bound to any one place, not even the holiest temple on earth. His throne was a chariot. He was mobile, he was cosmic, and he had come to the exiles in Babylon. He had not abandoned them. This vision would become the foundation. It was a vision of terrible power and awesome glory, designed to shock a broken people out of their despair and call them back to faithfulness. For thousands of years, this has been the accepted interpretation, a powerful symbolic vision, a theophany, Merkabah mysticism, A whole school of Jewish mystical thought grew out of trying to understand the deeper spiritual meanings of this chariot-throne. But in the 20th, a question that was once considered blasphemy but now seems eerily plausible. What if Ezekiel wasn't having a symbolic vision? What if he was simply a reporter? What if he was describing with perfect literal accuracy exactly what he saw? Let's strip away the theological language for a moment and look at the report. An object approaches from the sky. It is described as a great cloud, but it has a metallic sheen. They have multiple faces, suggesting a helmet or advanced sensory equipment. Their legs are described as rigid, and their feet are like polished metal. They are connected to a propulsion system of some kind, described as wings, which makes a deafening roar like a powerful engine. The craft they are a part of has a bizarre and highly advanced landing and propulsion system. It consists of crystalline wheels or orbs. The rims of these wheels are covered in eyes, which could be a primitive description of sensors, lights, or rivets on a complex piece of machinery. The craft can lift off the ground and hover. Above the main engine section there is a transparent dome or canopy, described as a terrible crystal. Above this canopy, inside the cockpit, is a command chair, a throne. And in that chair sits the pilot. He is surrounded by a radiant field, a rainbow. This being communicates with the witness, giving him a mission. The witness is overwhelmed by the experience and falls to the ground. Now, read any modern report of an alleged UFO encounter, a silent metallic craft that moves in impossible ways, strange lights, landings that leave marks on the ground, encounters with non-human pilots, or feelings of awe, terror, and a sense of overwhelming intelligence. The parallels are, to put it mildly, striking. Ezekiel's description is not vague. Unlike many other prophetic visions, which are dreamlike and allegorical, this one is filled with specific, technical-sounding details: the wheel within a wheel, the straight legs and bronze feet, the sound of the wings, the crystal. These sound less like the ramblings of a mystic and more like the testimony of an engineer struggling to describe a technology he cannot comprehend. Could the spirit in the wheels simply be his way of saying the craft and its propulsion system were intelligently controlled, a single integrated unit? Could the four faces be the different sides of a sophisticated helmet, or a creature whose head could rotate to see in all directions? Could the eyes on the wheels be landing light sensors, or simply a structural design that his mind interpreted as eyes because they seemed to be observing? The theory known as the ancient astronaut or ancient alien theory posits that many of the stories in ancient religious texts are not about supernatural gods, but about extraterrestrial visitors. Beings with advanced technology who were interpreted. Proponents of this theory ask, why would God, an infinite, non-physical being, need a machine to travel? Why a noisy, fiery, metallic chariot? Theologians would answer that God was accommodating himself to human understanding, using the imagery of a king's chariot to convey his power and mobility. It is a symbolic language. But what if it isn't? What if the reason it is described like a machine? Ezekiel goes to great pains to describe the mechanics of what he is seeing. He is meticulous. He is precise. He is the perfect witness, stunned but observant. He doesn't say, I dreamed of a chariot. He says, I looked and I saw. He describes its movement, its construction, its sound. This is an eyewitness account, and that is the dilemma we are left with: two equally mind. Possibility 1. A man in 593 BC experienced a profound spiritual vision of the true nature of God's glory. A vision so powerful it used the imagery of a celestial vehicle to communicate the concepts of divine omnipresence, power, and judgment. It was a message wrapped in the language of symbols, designed for its time and place, a piece of profound theological poetry. He described what he saw as accurately as his language and worldview would allow. He was not interpreting, he was reporting. The glory of the Lord was his only available framework for a technology. So advanced it appeared to be divine. He had a close encounter, and it became a cornerstone of faith for millions. Which is more incredible? A non-physical God revealing himself through the imagery of a complex physical machine. One asks us to accept a metaphysical truth that defies physical description. The other asks us to accept that our history might be radically different from what we've been taught, that we may not have been alone, and perhaps the most unsettling part is that the text works perfectly well for both interpretations. A believer can see the profound symbolism of God's mobile glory. A skeptic can see a stunningly accurate description of an advanced aircraft. Ezekiel himself was left transformed and terrified. The vision left him bitter and angry in his spirit, and the hand of the Lord was strong upon him. He sat among the exiles for 7 days, stunned into silence. This was not a comforting, gentle vision of angelic choirs. This was a brutal, overwhelming display of power that left him traumatized. Whatever he saw, it was real to him. It was a paradigm shattering. What was the source of that power? Was it the God who created the heavens and the earth, choosing to reveal a glimpse of his cosmic majesty in a form his servant could barely comprehend? Or was it a visitor from those same heavens, a traveler in a machine that, to a man of the Iron Age, could only be the chariot of God? The text won't give us a final answer. It only gives us the testimony, a testimony of fire. It is a puzzle encoded in a holy book, a technical report masquerading as a prophecy. Ezekiel's vision remains one of the most profound and disturbing mysteries in human history. A story that forces us to question the very nature of the divine, the limits of our understanding, and the possibility that the universe is far stranger than we have ever imagined. What do you think he saw by the River Chebar? A divine chariot or an... The evidence is in the text, but the conclusion is up to you. All right, that is all for today's video. If you liked this video, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.